Welcome to the Take the North podcast. I'm David Haugh from the Mully and Haugh Show on 670 The Score. Dan Wiederer from the Chicago Tribune covering the Bears at Halas Hall. And on this day, the Bears are leaving OTAs. They had minicamp last week. OTAs are over this week. Dan, I think the next time they get together officially, it will be training camp.
That is correct. This is the official last day of school here at Halas Hall, so to speak. And so this week, obviously, the 3-day OTA period was designed specifically around rookies, fewer than 24 players here for that. But obviously, it includes two very important ones in first-round picks, Caleb Williams and Rome Odunze. As you mentioned, it'll be about 34 days now before they are required to be back here for the rookie report date to training camp. And that's not that far off, but it does leave those guys and the rest of the fellow rookies with a bridge to cross of trying to figure out how to navigate that space so that you're getting better as football players and also decompressing in what has already been a long year and only promises to get longer as the grind begins in camp.
On this episode, you'll be able to hear from Shane Waldron. We'll hear from Rome Odunze. We'll hear from Caleb Williams, again, the three main speakers at the final day of OTAs. We'll talk about Kevin Warren and his latest quest or address downtown Chicago about the stadium project on the lakefront. Dan, there's not much activity, certainly, around the NFL. Other teams are gathering for their mandatory minicamps. The Bears did that last week. But I do think before we get started and dig into what we heard from Odunze, Caleb, and Shane Waldron, Marcedes Lewis is signed, and he's back for a 19th NFL season, back with the Bears for a second, 40 years old. Is it just a foregone conclusion that he'll make the team, or is this something that it sounds odd to even ask, but does he have to earn it?
No, I think he's here to make the football team, and that's why he resigned. It was really fun getting to know Marcedes a little bit last year because he's a deep-thinking guy. He's a guy that's incredibly driven, incredibly well-respected around the league, and now particularly in this building because of the way he goes about his business, the way he takes care of his body, the way he, steels his mind to be able to do this 19 times. You know what I mean? Like, what the grind of an NFL season is. To be 40 years old, to be signing up to do this again, it's a commitment without question, but it's a commitment he's in for. And he's a guy that once he's in for it, he's all in for it. And as Matt Eberflus spoke on Wednesday, there's an element of leadership and presence that he brings. And that is what he is here to bring as much as anything else. He can obviously be an enforcer as a run blocker. He can help you as a little bit of a mentor. But that leadership and that tone-setting ability that Marcedes Lewis has is something that the Bears were drawn to last year. They made a good connection, and then they decided to re-up on that connection this week.
I think also from a very practical standpoint, it helps make them feel better about any instability. Maybe that's overstating it, but the situation at tackle, because you do have somebody who is your third tight end in short yardage situations, maybe in the red zone, that can stabilize one side or another. Maybe it's Braxton Jones, maybe it's Darnell Wright, but I think you have that kind of security for a guy who obviously is a better blocker at the stage of his career and an asset, or else he wouldn't be here.
Selfishly, I remember thinking on locker cleanout day as we visited with him for about 10 or 12 minutes before he packed up his locker stall was, man, I wish there was another year to get to know Marcedes Lewis a little bit better. Well, here it is, and so it's fun during training camp to maybe reconnect there and get a little bit more of his insight, because he's been places, right? And he's seen things, and he knows what this league is all about, and he knows how to kind of relay and pay forward some of the intel that he's taken in over the years to players that need it. Obviously, two that we're going to talk about a lot in this episode, Rome Odunze and Caleb Williams, would be wise to pick his brain a little bit and just gather a little bit of wisdom, a little bit of advice and guidance as they try to get their own careers off the ground. So yeah, notable addition to say the least this week. And again, nothing but respect for that guy for his willingness to continue down this path. And again, he did it last year with an understanding that he has knowledge and experience that can be valuable to other people. And he has been of that service mindset. And I think that will serve the Bears very well.
When he came last year, he was familiar, obviously, with Luke Getsy from Green Bay days. This year, new offensive coordinator Shane Waldron, not so much, but we did hear from Shane Waldron, Dan, before the sum of masses scooted out of town or left the building. Before we get to hear from Waldron himself, what was your overall impression about what Shane Waldron had to say today?
Yeah, like Shane's got an approach here that I think is rooted around his ability to teach, first and foremost. Everybody you talk to here just continues to talk about his ability to relay information that sinks in, and the ability to relay it in different ways for different people. And so that's what Shane has been trying to do here over the last, 6 to 8 weeks here, as he's had the players in here for the offseason program, and to try to get the roots of his offensive system put in. Now, we heard from Cole Kmet a week ago saying, look, like there's a lot of overlap between what Luke Getsy was running a year ago and what Shane's running here. There's going to be twists, obviously, that Shane puts on things. There's going to be twists in how he calls the plays, but it's about creating that familiarity in the early stages in the spring and then reinforcing it so that when you get into training camp, you can kind of build on the volume that you've put in and kind of refine what is good for your players and what isn't quite working for your players. I think along with that, Shane has been a good voice for Caleb Williams and being that daily reminder of this is a process and we can only be at the stage of the process that we're in. There's no use looking ahead to step 7 or 8 when you haven't completed step 2. And so I think that voice has been very good at keeping Caleb grounded and very understanding that this is all going to take time, and just immerse yourself in where we are right now. And eventually we'll advance and you'll look back and go, wow, we've advanced a long way. But in the short term, it's just being really, really micro-focused on the next box of the checklist. And that's what he's worked with Caleb on, over the last 6 weeks.
Regardless of the business, whether it's a football team, a radio station, or an accounting firm, I mean, you always hear it's a relationship business. It's about relationships, and the relationship between Shane Waldron and Caleb Williams is going to be as important as any in that building next year. You could say that about almost anybody with Caleb Williams, and it would be true. But especially with the guy calling the plays, especially with the guy likely talking in his ear before he leaves the huddle and calls the cadence and works with him. So, Dan, we want to hear, I'll let you set it up, because Shane Waldron was pretty good in just talking about what he learned from Caleb Williams in the last 6 or 8 weeks.
Yeah, so 2 quick things also to that point that you just made. We had a chance today also to talk to Thomas Brown, the passing game coordinator here, and he was pretty emphatic in relaying some things that Ryan Poles has been very intentional about as well, which is limiting the number of voices that you have in Caleb Williams' head. And so the Bears have a structure here where they want Shane Waldron and Kerry Joseph to be basically the 2 guys that are talking with Caleb Williams. Now, they have all these other resources of people that are here to help the Caleb Williams development plan, but they want to create a chain of command and a structure here so that all of the information gets to Caleb Williams directly through Shane or Kerry Joseph, which I think is a cool approach of just being very, again, intentional and understanding of how this process is going to work. Well, Shane's had obviously the last 6 weeks to work with Caleb on the field, to work with them in the classroom, to meet with them. And so he was essentially asked at the end of today's OTA, what have been your lasting impressions of these first 6 weeks with your quarterback and your quarterback of the future? Here's what Shane had to say about that.
I think, confirming a lot of the things that we had gathered during the draft process, his competitive nature, his willingness to learn, his desire to know the why on everything that's happening, so that he's not just out there, robotic, trying to just run a play. He's out there really learning it, really understanding it. There's a long ways to go in terms of, going from one offense to another, but not skipping any of the steps, and knowing in order to achieve greatness, he has to put in a lot of hard work, and he's really backed that up with what he's demonstrated so far in the time we've been around him.
How did you see him manage those ebbs and flows, especially when the defense would understandably win a drive, win a session? How did you see him kind of manage those expectations and bounce back?
Yeah, I think that's a key part of playing quarterback and really playing in the NFL at all the positions, knowing that, I've mentioned this before, everyone you play against is good. Defenses have great players all around. Offenses have great players all throughout the league. And so there's going to be some good times. There's going to be some bad times. And, figuring out how you react to the ups and downs in a nice, even demeanor. And the thing we preach is, let's say there's about 65 plays each game. How can you play 65 individual snaps regardless of the outcome of the previous play, so that you can stay locked in, stay focused. And so the time in the off season for us is about training our minds as well as our bodies to react the right way, no matter what the outcome of the previous play was, knowing that there's a job to do on the next play. And not to say that the game's void of emotion, because there's going to be emotions, but how do you control those emotions? How do you handle them with that open mindset, that growth mindset? And I think Caleb's really embraced that, and you don't see one particular play impact the next series. He's learned from them and moved on.
Pretty good stuff.
There's two things there that I thought were notable. Number one, you heard him use the word robotic in that first answer, and it just instantly flashed me back to Justin Fields in week 3 last year saying, I'm playing too robotic. And Shane was talking there about Caleb's inquisitive side and his constant thirst to understand the reasoning behind everything that they're doing, whether it's conceptually, whether it's something fundamentally they're asking him to do. Caleb wants to know why, And in understanding the why, it kind of takes away some of that robotic tendency, and that's what you want your quarterback to do. You want him to play free. You want him to play relaxed. You want him to play like he has an understanding of what you're trying to accomplish. So that's one thing. The second thing in that second answer was just kind of trying to strengthen the emotional equilibrium when there are good periods, when there are bad periods, and just trying to figure out a way to do that in a successful manner at this level. You've been around it long enough, David, to know that that's not easy for every quarterback to do. It's not easy to do when you're a number 1 overall pick in a city that's as thirsty for success and quarterback success as this one is. That's going to be key to the short term of Caleb Williams' development. And ultimately the long term is his ability to handle all of that roller coaster without feeling shaken or overly euphoric at any point.
Before we hear from Caleb Williams and some of those things as well, he did use the term robotic, and immediately I thought about Justin Fields, but I also thought about Shane Waldron, and I wondered what you thought. You've been around him a couple times now, and his first impression with the Chicago media was that he was pretty intense. He's a pretty intense guy, and he's been described that way from players who have played for him to coaches who have worked with him. I wonder what is your impression of the guy who is heading into a season from far? I mean, we know what's at stake for Matt Eberflus, but Shane Waldron is going to be under the kind of scrutiny I'm not sure he's been under before, and just what your overall takeaways and impressions were of his personality.
I don't know that I have one yet, and that may be weird to say, but I'm still trying to feel him out. I had a good one-on-one conversation with Shane recently, and he felt looser to me. He felt more relaxed. He felt more relatable, if that makes sense. And you do get the sense that when he stands up behind the podium at times that there's still a little nervousness there.
Anxiety. You sense some anxiety. Yeah.
You can kind of feel it. And I don't think that I don't think that necessarily correlates to anything that's happening in his teaching or his coaching here, but it certainly, to what you said, is like the stage is bigger. It's newer. It's something you got to get used to. And particularly when you lose 2 games in a row and the offense struggles, like you're going to be taking arrows and you're going to be asked some really pointed questions and be asked to explain a lot of things. And that comfort in that spotlight is probably going to have to develop and enhance. I've had to do it a lot here inside these walls here, is getting to know new coaches. And sometimes it takes a little while to kind of to break through and kind of crack through the guarded exterior to learn what guys are all about. I'm eager to go down that path with Shane Waldron, because when you talk to people that have been around him, there's a tremendous amount of respect and a tremendous amount of curiosity with what he'll do with this golden opportunity. And so I'm fascinated to see how he navigates it all, because it will be new on a lot of different fronts.
Meanwhile, the impression Caleb Williams has left is easier to describe and impossible to
not nervous at all.
Exactly. A very easy confidence. I think that there's a release on Wednesday afternoon about him. There's an investment banking firm that he is announced being part of. He's going to have his hand in many different ways. He is a consummate businessman. He is a celebrity. We have talked about that. And he also represents the Bears very well. And he did so again on the final day of OTAs, Dan.
No question. 6 weeks into his time as a Bear, I love this guy and the way he carries himself. He just has a very relatable demeanor about him. He has a very natural warmth that I think guys are responding to. Thomas Brown talked about it today, and just the ability at 22 years old to come into a locker room where you do have a receiver in your offense that's been in the league for a long time and is in his well into his 30s. You just, as we talked about a minute ago, you're going to be talking to a tight end who just turned 40. And yet Caleb Williams seems to have this ability to connect. And it's important to him to connect. And there's so much to that piece for him that I think is really, really cool. He was asked, David, this afternoon about what he thinks his biggest accomplishment has been since he joined the Bears in late April. And he said connection, the ability to connect with a bunch of teammates and start those relationships. I felt like that was worth following up on, and kind of asked him about why he is so dedicated to trying to make those connections as a leader of this football team. Here was some of that back and forth.
You mentioned the word connection, and it's been clear that you've been very intentional about that part of things as a leader of this football team. Why does that mean what it means to you?
Yeah, it means the world, because I've been in situations where we go 7-5, whether it's college. I've been in situations where we go to championship, lose. I've been in situations where I won a championship. I've been in situations where we go to championship and lose. And, the biggest thing every time you hear and listen, I was just watching Matthew Stafford's Super Bowl, and, the sound pieces from that is, they go around and they all say, "I love you, brother. I love you," this and that. Everything's about the bond and trust that you build between each other, because then you go out there and you play with a different level of, kind of your mentality is different. Everything's different when you're out there playing for each other and, not out there playing for yourself. So the connection to be able to build a bond between not just 11 on the field, but the next 11 that comes on the field, which is the defense, and the next 11, and then all the other guys at 53, and everybody's treated with respect and love and care, but also, pushing each other to be our best. So, that's where the connection comes from, because you can't build something, pretty special at the end of the year without that bond, love, and trust for, your brothers.
When was it in your journey that you realized that was part of this?
Yeah, I would probably say high school. It was something that, my high school coach really, pushed us, to be a part of and really believe in and trust. And I've taken those with me, the little small things that, pieces that he's given me, and I've tried to implement it in any way possible throughout my years of playing, being around my teammates, working hard, pushing each other. But the togetherness, the trust was the things that stuck out the most in those teams and differences between the teams.
It's impressive. I mean, it really is impressive. He understands communication. He understands the value of connection. Yeah, I can remember. Doesn't matter who said it. A lot of people have repeated it. When the franchise quarterback, the right guy, walks into a building under the different circumstances or whatever, whether it's Joe Burrow, Patrick Mahomes, everybody changes the temperature. It changes everybody's attention span. It changes everything because he's the guy. And what I feel like we're experiencing here, or have experienced over the last 6 to 8 weeks in Chicago, feels like that metamorphosis, that because of who he is and how he's handled this moment so far. And yeah, I know people, it's early, and we're all very pro Caleb here, but this is the beginning of that process. My goodness, did you hear that answer about how he understands the value of connecting? He's not talking about anything making off-platform throws or play-action passes or his footwork or cadence. He's talking about relating to his teammates in a way that will make the Bears better as a football team. That's a young man that understands all those things.
And it's natural to him. I think that's the other part of this, is that it's very natural to him, and that it's a gift, and you have to use that gift in a way that complements the gifts that you bring to the football field. You heard the buzzwords he used in that clip with trust and togetherness, and understanding that those are kind of prerequisites for high-level team success. I know that I walked out of that press room today thinking, like, man, I wish Caleb Williams was my teammate. I wish he was my boss, because there's, as you said, there's an energy to it, right? Where you're like, yeah, let's go do this, Right. And so I think that there's something to that, Now, again, it all has to be backed up with on-field success and on-field results for any of it to mean anything. But I do think that he has a very, very strong understanding of what quarterback responsibilities are and how much they go beyond just calling a play in the huddle and making a good throw. And when you have somebody that has that understanding and is willing to work on those things, you've got the chance to do some special things, and we'll see where he takes it. But I just, the amount that he has spoken about care and connection during his time as a Bears quarterback already is a testament to how he's wired. And we're going to see how that wiring works for this franchise. But yeah, I think you came away with that same feeling where you just feel a little bit more alive after listening to that.
Before we get to Rome Odunze, another guy who has his share of charisma, in the interest of accuracy, because we care about accuracy here at Take the North, officially, Caleb Williams announced the formation of 888 Midas, a new partnership that seeks to associate with and capitalize on select alternative investments in private equity, venture capital, and real estate. So Caleb Williams, entrepreneur. That is a announcement from today. It's just a sign of the times, Dan. And there's not anybody that's going to work with 888 Midas and feel like they're not getting the best from Caleb Williams, as we just heard.
I thought 888 Midas is who I'm supposed to call when I need like my brakes done, but that must be a different number.
Hold on, let me make sure I'm accurate. Yeah,
rattle, Midas, thunder clatter, boom, boom, boom. I don't. Is that,
wow, that's pretty good. That's a good recall. Made a childhood impression. I'm speaking of making impressions. Rome Odunze, boy, does he have good feet. Boy, does he have good hands. Boy, Rome Odunze is the guy who, look, DJ Moore is proven, and then he's the number one wide receiver. Keenan Allen could be headed to Canton one day. Rome Odunze, I think, looks like the guy who is exciting because we don't know what he's capable of. But boy, is there anything that he doesn't do well?
No, and the more people that I talk to in Caleb's present and his past continue to come back to like two themes for me. And one of them is how smart he is as a football player, how much information he can digest, how much volume you can give him, and how quickly it sinks in and is then applied the next time he goes on the football field. And so he has this acumen for the game that he's going to tap into. Well, he's also really big and he's really fast and he makes contested catches. And oh, by the way, the other theme is that when big moments arise, he's fearless and he wants them. And there was countless examples as Washington made a run to the national title game last year where game was on the line and they said, let's put the ball in our best player's hands. And they got it to Rome Odunze and he made plays. And so he learned through that experience that, yeah, like I am up to that challenge, you know, and that helps you when you get to this level and the challenges are going to be bigger, of understanding that you've conquered some pretty big moments. To go along with that, he's a joy to listen to. He's a joy to talk to. You know, I came out of the combine saying, man, if the Bears were lucky enough to draft Rome Odunze, it's going to be a fun experience for anyone who has the opportunity to cover him, because you can feel, as you mentioned just a minute ago, the charisma and again, that engagement that he has the minute he walks in a room. It's part of the reason Ryan Poles fell so madly in love with him and wanted to make him the number 2 draft pick if he was able to. He had to take him at number 9. That was fine. The Bears saved draft capital by doing so. But again, for 10 minutes today in a short session with the media, that infectious enthusiasm was right there on the table. Go ahead.
I liked what he had to say about putting his mom to work when he gets out to Vegas and 115 degrees, and he's going to be running routes and learning the playbook, and he's expecting his mom to step up her game.
Yeah, she's got to call out the plays and she's got to help him along, and she's already been put on notice that that's coming, and so that's all part of this. I chose this next exchange because there's 2 questions here back to back. One of them is from our good friend Mark Potash, just wondering if Rome was in need of a break, because you got to remember, like, they played in the national championship game, you know, in the middle of January, and then they went right into the pre-draft process. And he got drafted in April. That's a pretty good exchange. Behind that, you'll hear him talk about just kind of orienting to the NFL and having that belief. But here's a quick snapshot of what it's like to talk to Rome Odunze.
If the training camp started tomorrow, would you be good with that, or do you need a break?
Hell no, I wouldn't be good with that. I wouldn't be good with that, because, you know, not necessarily that I think I need a break, but I'm not where I want to be at, you know, on a physicality standpoint, on a conditioning standpoint, on a, you know, who I am as a player standpoint. You know, if training camp was tomorrow and you're like, mentally wise, I'll be ready to go, man. Shit. I mean, it's my first year in the NFL, dog. I'm all for it. But, you know, I need this month to go get right and make sure, you know, this transition into the league is going to be, you know, swift and smooth as it can be.
I'm curious about it. As exciting as this whole process has been for you, is the excitement level increased now that you've seen your teammates, potential, everything, now that you've gotten into it? I'm curious what.
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, it's kind of a, you know, standing too close to the elephant when you first get here. It's just like, you know, that big old NFL sign in your face, and now you step back, you're like, oh, you know, I'm really in the NFL. Yeah, these guys are professional athletes, but we still playing ball. You know, we still going out there and doing what we've been loving to do since, you know, we was, you know, this tall. So definitely it's been, you know, a building of excitement for sure. And, I know, the butterflies and all that are going to continue to roll in when it's first game, first day of training camp, first, one-on-one period. It all comes with the journey. So absolutely.
It's a fun guy. Does that sound like somebody who's going to complain the first time he gets 3 targets and Keenan Allen has 11 and DJ Moore has 12? I don't think so. We'll wonder. I think there might be some people speaking for him, but I don't think this is a guy you worry about making. Nothing he has said so far, nothing that he has done in his football profile suggests football diva the way a lot of wide receivers come into the league. He's going to be fun to watch. I really am excited about Rome Odunze in his future.
Coolest part of that receivers room is, as you just mentioned, is it's just so low maintenance. All 3 of those guys, Keenan Allen, DJ Moore, Rome Odunze, they're not going to create peripheral stress for Caleb Williams that he'd rather not deal with. They're going to be along for the ride. They're going to try to help him. They're going to be enthusiastic. It's going to be fun. Look, like we've just talked about 3 guys here in a very short June episode, in Caleb Williams, Rome Odunze, and Mercedes Lewis, that drives home for me the idea that this is going to be a fun football team to cover. That's just 3 guys. There's maybe a dozen others on this football team that are a treat to talk to. Now, as well as I do that covering really, really successful football teams brings the fun to a new level. But covering guys on a daily basis who are this engaged and this enthusiastic and this willing to kind of do the back and forth, it's a lot of fun, and you can make up a lot of ground really quickly in learning about a football team when you have people that are like that. And so just put Rome Odunze on my list as a guy that, like, really, really looking forward to getting to know better as his rookie year goes on, and then as he gets to his second contract, and maybe we're still here in the 2030s on Take the North talking about the journey we've been on with Rome Odunze.
One more thing about the wide receivers before we get to Kevin Warren and his quest for the stadium project on the lakefront. I made this point on the Mully and Haugh show earlier in the week. I think it's worth reinforcing. We're going to talk a lot about targets, and you got 3 guys and who's going to be happy with the football, and there's only 1 ball. You look last year, Shane Waldron's offense in Seattle, 93 targets for Jackson Smith and Jigba, and both Tyler Lockett and DK Metcalf had 100 or more. So ball distribution was a reality in Seattle with 3 pretty good receivers. You had a rookie and you had 2 veterans, and you had an explosive guy, and you could, whatever you can assign the comparison, but it can work that way. Also,
they ran the ball pretty well too. So it tells you that you still have room for a running game in there as well.
With Walker, yeah, you run the ball. So Shane Waldron's not going to get away from that philosophically. So I brought up that point to DJ Moore, who was on the Mully and Haugh show on Monday morning, and he referenced his own experience in Carolina back in 2020. He was part of a receiving trio that included Robbie Anderson, now Robbie Chosen, Curtis Samuel, and DJ Moore. And all 3 of those receivers had similar breakdowns. Nobody had fewer than 95 targets. DJ Moore was the second leading wide receiver in terms of yardage that season, but he had the most average yards per catch with 18. And Chosen was the one who was maybe the chosen one in that offense, getting the most targets. Point being that you can spread the wealth if you are intentional about it. And, oh, by the way, that running back in that Panther offense, Christian McCaffrey. So pretty good. And when you have such an emphasis to get that guy the football, you can still spread it around. So this can be done. It's not as difficult as sometimes I think we make it appear.
No, you're right. And look, I speak for the both of us, I assume, in saying that these first 6 weeks of the regular season are going to be fascinating as we see that identity kind of come to life, and the Bears try to, sharpen who they are and what they want to be. They certainly have no shortage of guys that they can feature, and that's it's a blessing for Shane Waldron to be able to arrive at this time and have the ability to turn that loose.
Anything else on the field before we turn to Kevin Warren and what he had to say about the Bears' latest?
Well, one quick thing, I did ask Matt Eberflus if he has a vision for preseason games. The Bears will play 4 of them this year, and obviously with not only a rookie quarterback that needs some exposure, but an offense that needs kind of some timing and rhythm to it and development. What his plans were, he said they're still fluid, they're still coming together, but that they did look at the 3 main rookie quarterbacks from a year ago, Bryce Young, CJ Stroud, Anthony Richardson, and each of those guys got between 45 and 65 preseason game reps last August. So just have that number in the back of your head for kind of a target zone of where the Bears will aim to go with Caleb Williams for the preseason. Obviously, you got an extra game to parcel those out. But I think that'll be interesting to see how they use that month of August to get this offense better, because, Caleb's going to need to see it, and then at the same time, you don't want to overexpose him either, and you don't want to increase the risk more than you need to.
Excellent point to remember. 45 to 65 snaps for the rookie quarterbacks last year. Caleb Williams might be staring at that this season. All right, so Kevin Warren appeared on Tuesday at the Union League Club of Chicago. They have a forum, it was called the Lincoln Forum, and he obviously is on a promotional tour. I called it on the radio because he's trying to promote the idea that the Bears staying in Chicago still makes sense. Now, this is in the context, as we know, the General Assembly adjourned without any kind of Bears legislation. There's no money available. Chris Welch, the House Speaker, was on the Mully and Haugh show last week, reiterating that it's a non-starter. Those were the words of Governor Pritzker. Point is, the Bears want public monies to help fund their project on the lakefront, and they keep hearing no, no, no. So, in that context, Kevin Warren was asked by Luke Canellis of Fox 32, our friend who does a great job, he's a fixture on the scene, was asked if he was disappointed the Illinois legislature ended their session without any movement on funding for a new stadium.
I've ever been disappointed in anything. I understand these are big projects. They take time, energy, and effort to come together. They're expensive. You have to have foresight. You have to have vision. You have to have wisdom. There are a lot of pressing needs that are going on that our elected officials, and I'd like to thank all the elected officials who are here, for your service and everything you do on a daily basis. I mean, I understand this is part of the process, but I strongly believe, we need a new stadium, obviously. For Chicago to have never hosted a Super Bowl, a Final Four, a college football playoff, these mega events, we're losing out. And, Sports Business Journal comes out of the top 25 cities, ranked as far as, sports events. Chicago wasn't even on the top 25. I mean, that's embarrassing. And I've said it, recently. One of the things that concerns me, and I can say this, I live downtown, is that we only have 8 active cranes in the air here in Chicago, 8. And you compare that to a place like Nashville, has 45. Seattle, 45. Toronto, which is a city that's very similarly sized to Chicago, has 238. So if you don't have cranes, that means you're not building. If you're not building, you're not growing. If you're not growing, you fall behind. I mean, we got some of the greatest construction companies here that are ready to go to work. We have people ready to go to work. This stadium project, we're talking about 43,000 job hours, 4,000 new jobs. And I only know what I know, and I saw in Minneapolis and the Twin Cities for us to build the U.S. Bank Stadium, on time, under budget, for what it has done. Anyone who knows the Twin Cities, that part of town was a dying area, and it just activated. But can you imagine hosting a Super Bowl here in Chicago, a Final Four, college football playoff, the Olympics? I saw last week at Lucas Oil Stadium in Indianapolis, they built a swimming pool in there to host the Olympic trials. Those are things that we're missing out on: concerts, residencies, all the different things that we deserve. We have the infrastructure with the hotels, the people, the food. And so I'm confident that at the correct time that we will come together to figure out a stadium solution.
Kevin Warren at the Union League Club of Chicago. I have a reaction to that, Dan. What do you think?
I'd love to listen to your reaction. My initial thought is that there's a lot of numbers thrown around in there. I will say that I've always appreciated Kevin's ambition and his vision. I think at some point you need to find allies that create momentum and realistic a surge right toward what you're trying to do. And if you keep running into a roadblock, then sometimes you have to pivot. And that's I think where I'm I don't want to say concerned, but curious about right now is what is the Bears' pivot strategy if indeed they keep running into the word that you said 4 or 5 times just a minute ago, no, in terms of the funding and all of the things that you've tried to sell. They're not landing. They're not resonating right now. So what is the pivot? And I'd be interested to hear what you have to say.
The thing people have to remember is that we didn't hear it then, but he did repeat his goal, and that was to have shovels in the ground in 2025. For that to happen on the lakefront in the South Lot, for that to happen in the city of Chicago, they have to have some legislation passed in the 2024 calendar year. And that's just not realistic. So I appreciate his ambition as well. I think everybody loves it when, you know, you think big in a big city. We always urge our sports executives in Chicago to think big and bold and do all that. I think there's lofty rhetoric, and then I think there's things that need to be rooted in reality. And the reality is the Bears are unlikely to get this done their way. So you do have to pivot. Now, it's not impossible, and this is how you do it. And you talk to people who are sports business experts, maybe some of the people who put together this Sports Business Journal poll that Kevin is enamored with, because I think that's overstated, totally overstated, and the Bears are overvaluing that poll. But they need to do this. They need to consider this. They need to sell part of their team. They need to sell a portion of the team so they can create the equity, so they can create the capital to invest their own money if they want to build it in Chicago. It's what the Cubs were forced to do. The Cubs had to sell 10%. The Ricketts family had to sell 10% of the Chicago Cubs in order to pay for all the renovations to Wrigley Field themselves. That's not a defense of the Cubs. That's an explanation about what happened when they ran into their own brick wall, and it was put up brick by Rahm Emanuel, the mayor of Chicago. Different people in the way now. Statewide legislators. You have the governor himself, not the mayor of Chicago, who would love to see this happen. He wants more cranes in the air. But I don't think it's realistic unless the Bears are willing to sell part of their team, especially if they want to get shovels in the ground and be starting this in 2025 so they can open it in 2028. It's just too fast, too soon. You're not in Minneapolis. And I think the more Kevin pushes this, time is money. They're losing $150 million a year. Time is money. He's going to eventually start to have to answer some very difficult questions from the board, maybe from the McCaskies, because the bottom line is he's got a fiduciary responsibility to the Chicago Bears and the McCaskey family. And I do wonder, the more he goes on this kind of quixotic quest for a stadium in downtown Chicago, I don't know. I love the ambition. I just don't know how realistic it is.
No, and eventually you have to find the sweet spot, because I think you and I have spent years, decades, maybe in your case, of imploring the Bears to stop settling, right? And like, just stop settling for, you know, good enough being good enough, you know, and Kevin is the person that's trying to change that. Sometimes you can strive so large that you miss the sweet spot of what's realistic. And I think that's the next step here, is finding what's realistic and how do we do this? How do we make something happen in a way that can, you know, expedite this timeline that is now dragging? Like, I think we'd all agree that it's now dragging. And if we're talking about, you know, opening a building in 2028, that means at this time next year that not only is a shovel in the ground, but you better have dug a little bit too, you know? So that's not that far off. And there's a lot of obstacle course to get through if that's truly your goal. And so eventually, yeah, I do agree with you that there is a healthy middle ground that they have not yet found.
We will continue to follow that story and all of them here in the off season, and we'll be, before you know it, we'll be back talking about training camp. But you can find the Take the North podcast on your free Odyssey app or wherever you get your podcasts. You can watch us on the 670 The Scores YouTube page, and you can keep up with all that goes on. We'll be dropping a couple times a week in the summer in the short, mini abbreviated off season. So anything else, Dan, before we wrap things up?
The Bears have never been more compelling in mid-June of an offseason. I promise you that.
I would agree with that. I don't think that's an exaggeration at all. So for Adam Studzinski, our producer, Dan Wiederer from the Chicago Tribune, I'm David Haugh from the Mully and Haugh Show. Thank you for listening to the Take the North podcast.
Great talk. See you out there.